Right, just a big welcome so long for those of you who've joined us. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes just to allow everybody who has signed up and registered to attend the webinar to join us. So just a minute or two from now, and then we will kick off. But a warm welcome for those of you who are with us already. And a warm welcome for those who've joined. As I was just saying, we're just going to give it a minute or two to allow everybody else to join us who have signed up for the webinar, and we'll kick off in the next minute. All right, I think we've given it 2 minutes after the time, so we're going to kick off now, and a very big warm welcome to everyone for the webinar today with the key question: are you failing menopausal women in the workplace? My name is Brent. I'm a partner at Hanover, and I head our diversity, equity and inclusion solution practice. A warm welcome to all of you who've joined us today for the next hour. A couple of words briefly before we set the scene for today, just around the Zoom interface. I'm sure we're all very familiar with it by now, but just so you are aware, we've set up this webinar to ensure that everyone who joins is automatically on mute. We're going to be using two functionalities of Zoom today. One is the chat box, and in order to ensure that we create a level of engagement amongst our participants, please feel free to share any reflections, any comments, any experiences that you have in the chat box. If there are any questions, however, that you have for any of our panelist members across the hour today, please would you populate those in the Q&A box, and I'll be actively monitoring the Q&A box over the next hour in order to collect some of those questions to pose to our panelist members in the Q&A session, which will be nearer the end of the webinar. We should have around 10 minutes for Q&A. We won't necessarily be able to get through all of your questions there, but I will monitor the Q&A box for those questions, so please direct them to the right box in order for us to be able to ask that of our panelists. In setting the scene then for today, in a post-pandemic world and with the war for talents continuing to disrupt the market, it is even more crucial for organizations to focus their efforts in developing an inclusive culture and a value proposition that attracts and retains female talent. The lack of understanding about the menopause may cause a high attrition of women from the workplace, which is a direct threat in driving your DE&I agenda forward. This requires us to apply our DE&I strategies incrementally and in a way that is purposeful. To do that, we need to continuously educate ourselves and exercise our curiosity about the challenges women face in the workplace. This will help us to better empathize and create a safe, supportive, and inclusive workplace for everyone. This webinar aims to give us some practical things that we can do to understand more about perimenopause and the menopause. High-profile alarming stats that we are aware of, and also as a result of Channel 4's recent survey that was run, which was the largest of its kind, tell us that over 900,000 women have left their jobs due to menopause symptoms. 79% said their employer didn't have a menopause support network. And the highest rate of suicide amongst women in the UK happened to be between the ages of 45 to 49, which coincides when most women are perimenopausal. This information, coupled with the fact that menopausal women are the fastest growing demographic in the workplace, means more action is required. We now look forward to hearing from Dr. Naomi Potter in discussion with my colleague Christina Ratings, who is a partner here at Hanover. So Dr. Naomi Potter, a warm welcome to you. I'd like to hand over to you to introduce yourself, and then we'll hear more from Christina Ratings.
Hello. Can you see me okay and hear me okay?
Yep.
So thank you for inviting me to talk today. My name is Dr. Naomi Potter. I have a background in general practice, but I am a British Menopause Society accredited menopause specialist, and I now work full-time in menopause care.
So my name is Christina Ratings, and I'm a partner at Hanover and a proud mother of 2 girls. I've been at Hanover for 19 years, and I sit on the Global Diversity Council and the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Workforce. This subject is very personal to me, which is why I reached out to Dr. Potter for help. 3 years ago, at the age of 44, I noticed a change. Out of nowhere, I was getting episodes of mild anxiety, brain fog, fatigue, poor memory, and a lack of concentration. It was frightening, it was lonely, and at times humiliating. I didn't want to admit or share what I was experiencing with anyone, let alone my boss. I had convinced myself that I had early onset dementia. Looking back, it was so wrong that at 44, I had no idea that I was entering into the perimenopause. And more shockingly, nor did my GP. The perimenopause was a word I'd never heard of before, and it was something that had never been brought up when I shared my concerns with my GP on several occasions. As with so many other women in the UK, I was silenced with the prescription of antidepressants, but I wasn't depressed. It was only when I watched Lisa Snowdon interviewing Dr. Potter that I knew I wasn't going mad, I wasn't alone, and there was help out there. And thanks to Naomi and her colleagues at the Menopause Care Clinic at the New Victoria, I was given the right guidance and tests to make sure my introduction to HRT was safe and tailored to me. Naomi explained I was on the beginning of my HRT journey, so I needed to be patient and aware that tweaks would have to be made along the way. I have become so passionate about this topic that last year I spoke openly to James Emmett, our CEO, and told him what was going on. By this stage, I was no longer embarrassed, and I was so determined that the perimenopause wasn't going to take me down or ruin my career. I felt very strongly that if this was happening to me at such an early age, it was happening to some of my female colleagues and clients. So much of the time as a headhunter is trying to find my clients' female talent, but it became perfectly clear to me that it was my job to challenge my clients on how they were going to retain and properly support their experienced female employees so that they could have thriving careers. Hanover have been incredible at listening and being supportive to the changes and have come up with incredible policies to support female employees at Hanover going forward. What's really hit me on my crash course to the menopause is just how many women in their 40s and 50s don't know why they're suddenly feeling different, or why they're struggling to cope or even accomplish things that have never been an issue before. How can others help if women don't know how to help themselves? This is a massive topic and it impacts all walks of society. Everyone needs to get with the programme, be it leaders, line managers, partners, family, friends, doctors, you name it. This is something that affects us all. Anyway, that is enough about me. It's time to talk to my lifesaver, Dr. Naomi Potter. Naomi, thank you. It's so good to have you with us today. My first question, most of us know about the menopause, but can you briefly summarise what the perimenopause is and what the difference is between the two?
So historically, everybody has kind of heard of the menopause. So our mothers and our grandmothers would talk about the change, and they would refer to that as the time that their periods stopped. And that would on average be about the age of 50 or 51. But nobody talked about what they experienced in the lead up to that, which is a time of generally declining hormones, but also hormone fluctuations, and it can last for years. It can be the whole decade of your 40s that things are changing, and that is the perimenopause. It's where the ovaries are not functioning as they did in your 20s and 30s perhaps, and that symptoms are starting to creep in. But the difficulty is that they don't creep in according to a textbook. It doesn't just start one day and things start to, you might get hot flushes that then continue, or night sweats that then continue, or brain difficulties. They come and go, and they can fluctuate over the period of days, weeks, months. Some symptoms can come and they can go, and other symptoms can join and they can go. And it just makes it so confusing, because those symptoms can mimic so many other things as well. And so, like you said, with your GP not recognizing it as the perimenopause, it's because symptoms can mimic things like anxiety, depression, palpitations, so heart conditions, brain conditions, skin conditions, and it just makes it really, really difficult to identify. But what makes it easier is that every woman will go through it, and the likelihood is that they will start to experience something in their 40s. So it needs to be so high up on everybody's radar when a woman is suddenly experiencing something that they hadn't previously experienced. It's got to be part of that differential diagnosis. But really, up until the last year, nobody has really discussed it, educated anyone, and it's been this kind of unknown until very recently. And then, hopefully this will begin to permeate through every area of life, and it will just be known about, and then it will be so much easier for everyone to get the help that they need.
But just in terms of that, it does seem the topic seems to have dramatically increased in the last year or so, like you said, but why do you think there suddenly seems to be this menopause revolution going on in the UK? What's happened suddenly?
I think there's been some high profile celebrities that have finally felt comfortable in talking about their own experiences, and I think they've had such terrible experiences that they've wanted to share, and they've got such significant platforms that it's kind of snowballed. And so once you have one person talking about it and it being acceptable, another one does, and another one does, and it's permeated out. And then with the addition of high profile MPs and the newspapers becoming more interested in it, it's just kind of snowballed. I think COVID may have helped. I think that whilst everyone was in lockdown and they were at home and they were taking more to social media and their computers and their phones, rather than being distracted by everyday life, they became maybe a bit more introspective about how they were feeling. So they looked to social media, and then that kind of snowballed as well. And the fact that we are now also talking about things nowadays that we didn't used to. So in all sorts of areas that used to be considered taboo, we are now much more open about, and it's all just kind of come together, I think.
Yeah, and I think that Channel 4 documentary with Davina was recent. I think it was a couple of months ago, but that survey that they conducted, there were other statistics that were interesting. So I think they also mentioned that 1 in 10 women who've worked during the menopause have left a job due to their symptoms. And I was shocked to hear that 14% of menopausal women had reduced their hours, 14% had gone part-time, and 8% had not applied for promotion. I mean, from the hundreds of women that you're meeting every year, do those statistics from that documentary surprise you?
They don't surprise me at all. I mean, we see women in the depths of despair. I've seen women who've kind of all gone past that and have already given up. They've already given up work. Their relationships have already disintegrated. They've had soured relationship with children, with parents, because they literally cannot function. They cannot live their lives. but it's just swept under the carpet, and it has been forever. And so no, those statistics don't, because most women that come to us have got to a crisis point, because they have, they've been to their GPs and the GPs haven't been able to help, or they've been told that for one reason or another they can't have HRT. So we see it all day and every day.
Why do you think, or do you think, that employers are failing menopausal women in the workforce?
I think it's the same really as to why and how the NHS has failed women. It's failure to identify the perimenopause and the menopause as a problem. It's failure to talk about it, and it's failure to address it. And once you do all of those things, it's actually really quite straightforward to get that massive resource back on track and functioning as they should, and enable them to continue on with their careers. But I think it's just that age-old, patriarchy, women, the loss of youth, and women don't matter so much, and not understanding, and just not seeing it as a significant issue. There's those horrible words, things like the word hysterical, which just applies to, it's derived from the hyster, which is uterus. It's misogyny really. But hopefully things are starting to change, as it's not just the human cost to losing, or to losing those women. There's an economic cost. There's a it's a much bigger picture.
It's huge. I mean, what do you see as the main challenges for your patients that they face in the workplace? What examples do they give you that where they're struggling?
I think it's kind of multifaceted. Firstly, there's symptoms that are embarrassing, and I think that it's not always just a private issue, is it? It's so embarrassing symptoms, whether it's hot flushes, so they are embarrassing. If you're standing up giving a presentation and you're suddenly bright red and dripping in sweat, it's not, nobody wants to experience that. Other embarrassing symptoms, so brain symptoms can be very embarrassing, because if you have brain fog or word finding difficulties, again, especially if you're giving a presentation, then that's mortifying. Need to go to the toilet, period issues, so flooding, if that happens, it's again really, really embarrassing. But in addition, there's potentially being in a situation where you're surrounded by women that we're surrounded by people that don't understand. So if you're in a very male-dominated workplace, potentially speaking to a man about issues that they may have no idea about, especially when the symptoms are embarrassing, then it can be really hard. And if it's not spoken about and you're the first person that's bringing it up, then it's especially difficult. Being seen as being a failure, a loss of youth, all of those things are difficult to address, I think.
But I think it's what you said as well, because when I was younger, before I experienced this, I just thought about the final change. I think what I had no idea about, that this could go on, this peri-menopause could go on for 10 to 15 years. And it's actually, for me, I'm not having a lot of what you said. It's the brain functioning. It's kind of going to a client meeting and thinking, I'm going to forget some terminology, or I'm going to forget a name, and it's even just feeling anxious that you're going to have that sudden brain fog. So you start to doubt yourself. I think that's, it's definitely, for me, it's been more of a brain function than anything.
And that can be self-perpetuating, can't it? So if you are experiencing brain fog, you can then become anxious about brain fog, which makes brain fog worse, and then you get into this cycle of a downhill spiral. It's horrible.
And I think what a lot of people don't know is the effect sleep is having on women in their 40s and 50s. Can you just talk us through that? Why are women sleepless in their 40s and 50s?
So hormones impact on sleep itself, but they also give, so a decline in hormones also gives you symptoms that wake you from your sleep or that give you sleep of a lesser quality. So if you're having recurrent night sweats, you are going to keep waking up because you're drenched and freezing cold and have to get up and change. If you are having those horrible adrenaline surges, then they wake you up with a start in the middle of the night, and then it can be very difficult to get back to sleep. If it's having a mood effect, then that can also affect sleep. So that's the first thing to address, is that you've got symptoms that can then impact on sleep. But once you get into a routine of fitful sleep or poor sleep, then even if those symptoms are resolved, it can lead to behavioural changes which can give you something called insomnia.
Right.
And then the strategies that you employ to help with insomnia actually can make things worse. So the way you should treat insomnia is almost counterintuitive. So it's a double whammy, really. The symptoms itself, and then the knock-on effect. Plus, as everybody gets older, sleep changes. You sleep, sleep less deeply. You've also got interruptions, so potentially children not sleeping well. You might have had a decade of poor sleep because of young children, and then children who come into you in the middle of the night, and it's just all of these things come together, the perfect storm.
Yeah. And just in terms of, this webinar, Naomi, is for leaders, HR directors, line managers, to really understand how they can support females in the workplace. What are the key signs that they should be looking out for, that someone's struggling at work? Could it be that someone becomes more impatient? Or, is there anything that you can give people that don't know about this subject, any kind of signs that they should be looking out for? Is that very difficult to answer that question?
Well, I think that the best predictor of future performance is past performance. And so if you have somebody that that has suddenly changed, that is suddenly not performing well, or is behaving out of character, or there's something that's flagging up to you that they're not quite right, then that would be the first thing, is that people don't tend to change. They tend to continue on in the same vein. But yet women suddenly feel, so one of their symptoms is that they are not themselves, that something's not right, that something has changed. So that's a really big flag. And it's one of the flags that we use when patients come to us and they say, well, you know what, I don't know what it is. I don't know, I don't know what's wrong. I just don't feel like me. And that's probably the biggest flag. And it's just being open-minded, isn't it? And making sure that there aren't taboos, that you can talk about anything, you can bring anything to the table, and you're not going to be penalised as a result of it.
Yeah, it's quite empowering as well. Like I said earlier, talking to James Emmett, our CEO, sorry, he really listened and said, right, talk me through this. What do we need to do? How can we help? And Brent's going to be talking about that later. But if you've got someone that's properly listening, and it wasn't an uncomfortable conversation, it really wasn't. But I remember telling my husband, saying, I'm going to go and talk to James, and he said, don't do it. It's a sign of weakness. It's not good for your career. And I was like, okay. And completely ignored him. I just, so that's just another question. When you talk to, I don't know, when I talk to my mother or my mother-in-law or other women who are now maybe in their 70s, because, there's a new generation that are very happy to talk about this and are not embarrassed. Some of them go, well, I don't know what you're talking about, and it wasn't a problem in my day. What do you say? It was obviously, this must have been going on for centuries. So why is it that it's my generation that are talking about this and feeling the impact, but yet it sometimes feels that, our mothers aren't necessarily helping us out because they kind of brush it under the carpet?
I think that they definitely experienced it, but they didn't talk about it. My mum always says to me that I talked to my friends about small children in a completely different way to how she did with her peers, that we were much more open about the lows as well as the highs, and the dirtiness of it, and the grittiness of it. And I think we are just used to talking more than the older generation. I think probably the generation of women in their 40s and 50s juggle potentially a bit more, because they are more likely to have a demanding career.
Yep.
I don't think it necessarily means that they suffer more, but maybe it's more openly apparent because things have to change. They have to not, if you can't work, you can't work. Whereas if you are in the home, then it maybe is covered up a little bit better. But certainly, I look back to when I was a junior doctor and I was working in psychiatry, and the numbers of women that we used to see in their late 40s and early 50s who were treated as if they were psychiatric patients. When I look back and I just think, my goodness, you were not a psychiatric patient at all. You just needed estrogen.
And do you have case studies, Naomi, of what the knock-on effects are if no action or support is offered to menopausal women in the workplace? What have you seen happen to your patients who kind of got help too late in some ways? I'm talking about their careers.
We see women coming to us where their careers are over. I mean, I don't know why. We have a lot of patients who come to us as ex-nurses. I really don't know why that is, but I see example after example of women who were very, really, really high level nurses in the NHS, and then they got to their late 40s or early 50s and they just couldn't function and they couldn't work. And it's very, very hard to go back into a career like that. And so they are lost. Essentially, they are lost to the workforce. And some do manage to get back in if they find help and they manage to get their confidence back. But some don't, and it is really, really sad and unnecessary.
Have you heard of anyone that's been unfairly dismissed? Has there been unfair dismissals or anything that's kind of, or is it something that's so new now that women aren't making a fuss of why maybe they lost their job?
We have had some patients who are in the process of those kinds of claims. Police force is one that we see a few. So it tends to be kind of big institutions, big government bodies. But I think now in the last year or so, because it's become much more publicised, I'm hoping that will drop off.
Right.
But I mean, I can only speak from my own experience of what I've observed. But absolutely, it is a massive, massive problem.
Yeah. And are you finding now with this revolution, are your new clients, younger than you've seen in the past? Are you seeing a change in the type of patients that are coming your way?
They are different. They are, because I think the how you manage the menopause is filtering through to general practice now. So we used to see very straightforward women who really just needed HRT. The patients that come through to us now are more complex, so they have much more in the way of other medical problems or difficulties with HRT that really need specialist management. So I think that's a good thing. I mean, I think that's utterly appropriate. We are specialists, and we should just see those women who need specialist intervention. You don't need to come to see us if you just need a prescription for HRT. Any GP should be able to do that.
So you're saying that's changing because GPs are finally getting educated on this topic and they can take a big part of what you were dealing with previously?
I think so. I mean, we haven't done a study to prove it, but that certainly seems to be the case. Like, the complexity of the patients that come through now is really is very demanding, but it's appropriate. It's what we should be seeing.
Right. And if you were a CEO, Naomi, in financial services, what would you do if you ran well, you do run a company, but if you ran a company in the city, what would be your first initiatives?
You need to have a menopause policy. I think you've got a menopause policy, haven't you?
Yes,
but it's got to be the number one. It's got to be number one, because as soon as it's down in writing for everybody to see, then it automatically makes it acceptable. But that policy has to be robust. It has to mean what it says. You need a climate of transparency, so there needs to be no taboo about talking about it, and it needs to be easy in order to help women with their symptoms and help women access help. And I think if you have that, you can't really go wrong, because if you say what you mean and you mean what you say, and all of that is in place, then the vast majority of women should be supported through that transition. And once all that support network is in place, you're kind of home free. It should be easy.
Yeah. And just, I guess, my final part of my questioning here is, we want to know as women and as leaders that there is light at the end of the tunnel and there are solutions. And I know what we're about to talk about, we could probably have hours of sessions like you've had with Davina and Lisa and, you know, all the other celebrities you openly talk to. But what are the options for women going through these changes? And is HRT the game changer for many women?
The first line treatment is HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy. And in the vast majority of women that can take it, so there are some women that can't if they have breast cancer, for example, or endometrial cancer, but for the vast majority of women that can take it, it should really reverse the vast majority of their symptoms. Now, it can take a while. It can take tweaking, it can take dose adjustment, product adjustment, and also as time goes on, adjustments over time. But if you persevere, it tends to be, you'd be very, very unlucky if it didn't work for you.
Okay.
If you start HRT in the perimenopause, because your own ovaries are still functioning, but they're just functioning in a much more haphazard way, it can require more constant tweaking than if you have somebody who is postmenopausal. So basically their ovaries aren't really doing very much at all. Once you get to that point, it can be more straightforward because you've got a blank sheet, whereas when you first start, it can be much more turbulent. But that's not to say you don't need that top up in the perimenopause when symptoms can be horrific.
Okay. And what are the top myths that, you know, there's so many people that are, when I feel like I'm an ambassador for HRT, but what are the myths that you find quite infuriating that you need to keep telling people?
So there's loads. I mean, there's still a lot of fear around HRT, and I think that stems from, there was a couple of studies about 20 years ago that really changed the way everybody thought about HRT for the worse, and it was a huge knockback for women's health. Two very, very well-respected studies that it essentially said incorrectly that HRT causes breast cancer, strokes, heart disease. And because it was such a big thing, it filtered through very quickly. A whole generation of women were taken off their HRT, and lots of women weren't started on it. But since then, we have realised how much safer it is, but that information hasn't crept through. And what's hung over are all the myths associated with it, which are HRT will give you breast cancer, HRT isn't natural, it's not what you should be doing. And then all of the constraints around it. So we often have women who come to us and say, my GP's taken me off HRT because I've been on it for 5 years, or I'm over the age of 50, or I'm overweight, or I have high blood pressure, or my gran had breast cancer, or any of those kinds of things. It's absolutely fine to be on HRT for all of those, in all of those scenarios. Okay. And we also see women with more complex health issues, and it's still fine to take estrogen through the skin. And that is things like if you have an early menopause, you can stay on, you can start on HRT very, very young and stay on it for a long time. If you have an underlying clotting disorder, so there's a few health conditions that make your blood more sticky.
Right.
That if you take oral estrogen, it can also make your blood more sticky. But using estrogen through the skin, which is the way that we tend to give it nowadays, is the safest way. It's normally fine to use it. And we talk to hematologists, and we do our homework, but there's circumstances like that where, again, the vast majority of women can take HRT. Breast cancer.
Sorry.
I was going to talk just a bit about, family history of breast cancer. Another cohort of women that come to us is that I'm not allowed HRT because I have a strong family history of breast cancer.
Yeah.
Having a strong family history of breast cancer does mean that you are more likely to develop breast cancer, but taking HRT on top of that is not thought to increase that risk further. So it's just about seeing things for what they are, rather than HRT gives you breast cancer or it makes you clot. It's just that these women who are going to have a clot because they've got a clotting disorder, if it's not managed correctly, they probably will have a clot, but it's not the HRT that gave them the clot. In the same way with breast cancer, like the women who get breast cancer are probably going to get breast cancer anyway. It's not the HRT
Right.
that gave them the breast cancer.
Okay. And just in terms of alternatives, so if HRT is not an option, what are your alternatives?
So it really depends on symptoms. So if you're not going to use HRT, then if you have a specific symptom, we can give a treatment that helps that specific symptom. So, for example, that we have specific medications that we use for things like hot flushes, for and night sweats. For mood, we might use some types of antidepressants where it's totally appropriate to use it.
Okay.
For urogenital symptoms, we can still use, almost universally, we can still use topical estrogens, which is just using estrogen creams or pessaries vaginally that can help with all the urinary and vaginal symptoms that can be massively debilitating. So we tend to be much more symptom driven and target that symptom rather than giving a kind of global hormone replacement.
And are you saying as well, it's not too late to take HRT once you've reached the menopause? So, when is the best time to start, in your opinion?
I think it really depends on symptoms. So if you are struggling with symptoms and it is impacting on your life and your well-being, that's probably the time to start taking it.
Yeah.
And it's different for everyone, because also taking it does generate the risk of side effects and problems associated with taking it. So it's not always a walk in the park. It's not always a just take the HRT, you'll be fine, even if you've not really got symptoms. It is always about a balance of risk and benefit. But what we understand is that there is a window of opportunity which lasts for about 10 years after a woman's last period. So if the average age is 50, it tends to be kind of 50 to 60. Yeah. Whereby it's thought that if you start taking HRT, there are health benefits associated with the heart and the blood vessels. After that point, it becomes a little bit grey as to whether taking additional estrogen is going to be beneficial or not, and or whether it becomes a bit more riskier for the blood vessels. But really, any time in that first 10 years is thought to be beneficial, and then after that, it very much depends on what the individual's health circumstances, really.
Brilliant. My last question is: have you seen patients' lives and careers? Again, this is all about the workplace, but their careers positively turn around by taking HRT and other interventions. If you've got a case study of someone who their career was almost had come to an end and suddenly everything changed for the best.
I do. I had one of my earliest patients who was a nurse, a senior sister, like hugely experienced, and I think she ran an ITU. She was an educator and didn't know what on earth was happening, and so her life just crumbled. Her relationship fell apart, her career fell apart, and she was off work permanently, off sick. And she came to me, it must have been at the beginning of lockdown, and we started her on HRT, and she had a lot of other health problems, but she got back to work, and she is now back working as a ward sister. And she's just doing things and running, and she couldn't run, so she was a half marathon or a marathon runner, and she had to stop all of her running because her joints were too sore, and that meant that she put on weight, and so that was a kind of negative health spiral in that respect, and now she's back running. So it really can be a game changer, and I know it sounds really cliched and almost a bit Disney in the way it can turn things around, but it really can.
It really can. I know it can. So thank you so much for your valuable insight. So in a moment, we're going to be giving our clients the chance to ask you some direct questions, Naomi, but can I just take this opportunity to turn to our head of diversity, equity and inclusion, Brent Herman, and just ask a couple of questions. So Brent, you and the Hanover Solutions team are working so closely with our clients to really drive cultural change within their organizations, and you're also assisting them in effective ways to retain and attract seasoned female talent. From what you're seeing, what actions and solutions are Hanover offering clients so that organizations are better equipped to support their menopausal employees?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Christina. And we've got a couple of slides just to show people, just so you have some of this information to refer back to on the screen. I think I'd answer it in two ways. Firstly, in terms of sharing Hanover's blueprint for you to take ideas away from as participants on the webinar. So at Hanover, we certainly need to be doing work in-house to be credible partners with our clients on the menopause. It's the right thing to do. And we've engaged in cultural change with a big push to ensure that all employees understand the challenges that women in their 40s and their 50s are facing through training, through open conversations, through well-being strategies. And we have also set up support groups backed by an internal voluntary menopause support network. This provides a safe space for women to offload, connect, and share experiences. Hanover has also offered financial support in the form of £1,000 for female employees in their first year of suffering menopausal symptoms. This covers 2 private consultations with a specialist menopause doctor and screening, and there is also an annual follow-up for appointments. Coaching is also offered as something with regular one-to-one sessions with an independent coach, which employees can talk through challenges, look to enhance their performance and grow in their careers. And this is something that is also offered to all employees, not only to women. And Hanover's also believed in working flexibly for the last 25 years. So we're very much ahead of the curve when it comes to giving all employees flexible working options. We also back the Menopausal Workplace Pledge campaign, and there is also management training offered to help leaders spot changes in patterns and to monitor employees' well-being in general. We also work really hard to create an environment in which everyone feels comfortable talking about the menopause, and we're writing blogs, posts, running webinars, and doing all we can to provide awareness. Everything we do at Hanover, we have the experience and expertise to support our clients and their organizations. And you can see here, we've also released recently a practical guide for business leaders, which for those who've attended the webinar today, you're welcome to download from our website. In terms of our clients, we run webinars on the menopause to educate organizations for everyone, again, not just women. This drives a sense of inclusion and a greater sense of allyship for women. We move organizations to conscious inclusion through development workshops and awareness programs around how assumptions drive our behaviors and how microaggressions towards women who are menopausal will also impact them and the business over time. And we create awareness, which means that we take positive action to create that safe, supportive, inclusive workplace for women. We also facilitate conversations around the menopause and provide you with support for menopause awareness days for organizations on their campaigns. And again, of course, one-to-one coaching, as I've mentioned previously. So that just gives a little bit of a summary around both what we do within Hanover and what we can offer to our clients.
And Brent, how do you feel leaders could better support women at work, and what trends are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because it's something that's come up in the Q&A, not just in terms of strategies, but also the roles that leaders can play, but also that men can play in organizations. And I think it certainly comes down to one of the comments we've seen in the chat by Stuart around role modeling by leaders, that is absolutely key. Leaders need to be able to be curious enough to educate themselves on the topic of perimenopause and menopause. And we can certainly draw confidence from knowledge. So leaning in to have what might initially be uncomfortable conversations can be made a lot easier when we know more about the topic. We also know it's important, given the stigma of the menopause and its relation to age, and in turn the concern that age may have on one's career and on one's career prospects. And we should also consider, from a transgender or gender fluid employee perspective, those who may be going through the menopause may not necessarily wish to divulge this, as it may not be a preference for them to disclose information relating to gender. Creating ERGs for women and ensuring a support network is in place, I think, is essential as well. That creates a safe space and again creates a sense of knowledge on the topic. And we know that other companies out there, such as ASOS, have developed gender neutral policies to support employees who are going through the menopause, and that allows them access as well to flexible working and time off at short notice. We also know Tesco, for example, has introduced breathable fabric into uniforms for women in the menopause to help with hot flushes that make it a little bit more bearable in intense workplaces. And organizations such as Age UK have provided noise-reducing headphones and invested in USB desk fans as some ideas. Aviva also created an initiative in 2020 called Peri that allowed all employees access to a 45-minute private consultation and live chats, and that was offered to address multiple employee challenges, of which the menopause is one. We also know Santander engaged the Peri app with huge success. So those are just some examples, again, from the external market to share with everyone.
Brent, thank you so much. I will now leave you in Brent's capable hands to lead the final part of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And just going back to our Q&A box, we have got a couple of questions there. I think, firstly, one for you, Dr. Potter, and it might be an interesting one to answer because you're not necessarily in the heads of other male GPs, but perhaps from your experience in the field. The question is, do you feel that male GPs or are male GPs have understanding of the menopause as female GPs? Be interesting to have your view on that.
Yeah, I mean, so I kind of see it via my patients, and they bring their own experiences of their own GPs to me. And so I can't kind of comment whether this is kind of universal, but certainly from my patients, they don't seem to have a problem so much with the, with the gender of a GP. And in fact, if anything, some of them have the worst experiences with their own GPs who tend to be female and late 40s, early 50s. And I don't know whether they just think that they're going through it and they're okay, so why should their patients be having an issue? And I think that one of the unfortunate things to have come out of what's happened in the last year or so is that some doctors kind of dig their heels in when they see anything kind of media-based or celebrity-based taking effect or snowballing, and that they think it's just basically glorifying something that doesn't need to be glorified or magnified. So we have seen that, but I wouldn't say it was particularly from male GPs. I think they tend to almost be more open to guidance from their patients. So they may not know so much, but they tend to be guided by what their very educated patients tell them, because they've often done lots of research and they know more than the doctor does, which is fine, and they accept that. But I think that tends to be what we've seen more of.
Thank you. And I know that there's been some recent cutting edge research that's been done around perimenopause and the menopause. And I'm just curious to know if you agree that HRT should be taken at the onset of perimenopausal symptoms, and that if you do leave it too late, HRT may become unreceptive to therapy. Do you have a view on that?
I think that it is, like I kind of touched upon earlier, it is all a balance. So it's quite hard to pinpoint when perimenopause symptoms start. They tend to creep in and creep out and creep in and creep out. And taking HRT isn't a walk in a park. It can be a bit of a hassle. So it's just worth balancing up, like at what point is it worth committing to it and taking it for those benefits. And it tends to be once symptoms have started to have an impact on life, and then absolutely that's the time to start taking it. You don't need to wait till you have stopped your periods. You don't need to wait until you're 50 by any means. In terms of not working once you have left it a while, not really. It depends on what symptoms you are aiming to treat. So if you are aiming to treat things like hot flushes and night sweats, replacing estrogen really at any point helps. If you are aiming to improve mood and you've had 10 years of low mood, then that might be more refractory. So most of the answers to any question about the menopause and HRT are it depends, and I'm afraid that's kind of the answer. Is it depends on the circumstance, really.
Excellent. We also have another question in the Q&A box around recommendations on resources to educate managers on the challenges that women face in the workplace. And I think I'd referred earlier to the practical guide that we've launched at Hanover. So just referring everyone back to that, I think it is full of fantastic resources that you can access there. So please do feel free to access that. I know following this webinar, we'll give everyone access and a link to access that guide, but that should answer the question there as well. And then a last question for you, Dr. Potter, is why are many menopausal women sleepless?
Well, we kind of touched upon this a little bit earlier in the talk, didn't we? It depends on, so symptoms can impact on sleep. So night sweats will wake you up. You will be, freezing cold, drenched in sweat, have to get changed. And then once you are up and wandering around, it can then take time to go back to sleep. The anxiety symptoms that are associated also cause disruption in sleep. So you can literally be fast asleep and be suddenly awoken with this overwhelming sense of panic that comes from nowhere, and you can't even work out what is going on in your brain. It's literally a physical sense of panic, and then you have adrenaline surging through your body for what feels like a very long time, and then again it can be very hard to go back to sleep. But then as those symptoms persist, it then causes changes to how you would normally go to sleep and stay asleep, and then a wake pattern, and then those can persist for longer than the symptoms can.
Great. And I think we also just saw in the chat a comment as you were having a discussion there with Christina around the fact that diet and lifestyle may also have an impact on symptoms. Do you want to just comment a little bit around that?
Diet and lifestyle can make a massive difference. So HRT is not going to fix everything. It will certainly fix the loss of estrogen plus or minus testosterone. But if you are sedentary and you don't eat a well-balanced diet, you cannot get away with it in your 40s and 50s like you could in your 20s and 30s. Equally, so a lot of women with their symptoms, they self-medicate with alcohol, sugar, caffeine. If you have had a terrible night's sleep, you need caffeine to wake you up, you need sugar to keep you going, and then by the end of the day you are wired and can't go to sleep, and then that impacts on your sleep, and you end up in this vicious cycle. And so it is really important to have an awareness of how you are self-medicating and how to break it, and then to just flip over and use exercise and diet as your self-medication rather than caffeine, sugar and alcohol. And it can make a tremendous amount of difference.
Fantastic, thank you. And just responding lastly to one more comment in the chat, and I'll pick this one up, and that's from Lucy, just asking a question around, the risks associated with having the knowledge and being trained to confront a colleague around thinking that there are symptoms, or trying to open up a conversation around perimenopause and the menopause. I think certainly it is important there, I would say, to not make assumptions to have more of an open conversation with someone in the workplace, and to allow them to know that they can come to you and have a conversation about this. And I think that is a big part of the topic, is it's breaking the taboo, it's breaking the sense of, you know, we don't discuss these things here, and creating an environment in the space where people have knowledge, they understand how to manage this, and they're able to create an environment where everyone in a workplace feels like I can go and have a conversation, or there is a means to have that, or to gain support should I want to. So I definitely think it's a good prompt there in the chat, and a good caution for us not to make assumptions or to open up conversations that maybe are less appropriate for people, but just to create an environment and a culture where people feel that it is a comfortable space and that I can have that dialogue if I so choose to do so. So that brings us to a close just in terms of the time we have for our Q&A, and just thank you to everyone who's contributed in the chat and in the Q&A box. We're just going to run a couple of polls now for everyone who's attended the webinar. So we're going to bring up our first of 3 short polls, and we'd really value just responding to those. The first one there, as you see on your screen, how did you value the content? So again, if you could just provide an answer there from 5 to very valuable, or 1 not at all. Just give you a moment to respond to that before we move on to the second one. Okay, and we'll bring up the second one shortly. Did you get some actionable insights? So yes, no, or maybe need to reflect. And bringing up our final one, how can we support you on this journey? So would you like to be contacted? Firstly, yes, about DE&I solutions with a focus on women in the workplace. Secondly, yes, about menopause workshops. Thirdly, yes, about hiring senior female talent. Fourthly, yes, about executive search, or no, thank you. So if you could just let us know there. Okay, and as we allow you just a bit more time to complete that, I think now are closed. I would just like to direct your attention to another slide that just gives you some contact details for Dr. Naomi Potter, for myself, and for my colleague Christina Ratings. So there you can see the contact details come up on your screen. Should you want to contact any of us, that would be the best way to do it, by email, through websites, or on Instagram. So all of those details there for you to access. And I'd just like to thank all of our guests. I'd like to thank Christina Ratings as well, and Dr. Naomi Potter, and all of our attendees for joining us here today. I think what we've really heard here today is truly the start of a menopause revolution in the UK. Our awareness and efforts around perimenopause and the menopause are steps to move the DEI agenda forward, but it must go beyond awareness to actions that drive change and really have an impact on the ground. It is the right thing to do. We hope you've taken away a lot from today, and that it equips you with more knowledge than you came with, and more confidence to engage in the topic. And we look forward to connecting with you all outside of this forum in future meetings and engagements, and to offer our expertise and capability to support you through this critically important topic. So many thanks everyone for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.